Hello Proponomics people, and welcome to day 6 of the Proponomics Advent Calendar in 2023. And this is the longer form explainer video, and today I'm talking about the macro concept of the economic cycle and why that's important for property investors. So first of all, we've got to consider the 4 parts of the economic cycle. The expansion, where we'd all like to be all of the time in an ideal world, could be a boom. A boom would be a particularly fast expansion, which is great at the time, but might of course well lead to, when we get to the inevitable peak, us going towards contraction, where things start shrinking and then officially perhaps get into recession, which is 2 quarters of negative GDP growth in a row. That is the textbook definition. And then at some point after that, we're going to get to a trough, of course, where things turn around. So we've reached the bottom of the cycle and hopefully go into an expansionary phase again. Now, as I said earlier, we'd all like to be in expansion all of the time, but of course expansion can be quite dangerous because sometimes credit conditions have loosened. So we get a credit-fueled boom. That would be really applicable to the property market between 2002 and 2007 in the UK. Money became a lot easier to get hold of, and then you ended up in this ridiculous position where there'd be 100% mortgages on day one, perhaps even up to 125% mortgages if it was your own residential property. So you were borrowing more than the value of the property. Money was so freely available. It wasn't amazingly cheap, which is the cycle that we've been through since then, because there was such a big bang after the top of that incredible boom that we had up to 2007. And of course, it wasn't just property that suffered, but property is often looked at as the big catalyst and what started the great financial crisis. So afterwards, what was the result of that? Lots of cheap money was pumped into the financial system in order to hold things up. Very, very cheap credit. This is very traditional economic thought. And it was such a big problem that there was an incredibly large amount of credit pumped in. And we had this incredible 12-year period, which kept interest rates particularly low. But there wouldn't be many people who would describe it as a boom until, of course, the pandemic came and the interest rates went right down to zero. And there was so much stimulus pumped into the economy that an awful lot of that stimulus found its way into the property market. So we then did have an expansionary phase, which was brought savagely to an end by the appointment of Liz Truss as the Prime Minister and Kwasi Kwarteng as the Chancellor after the famed autumn budget, mini budget of 2022, which absolutely shattered and smashed the interest rates upwards and brought an end to the top of the property market boom. Might not have been a bad thing in terms of popping the bubble before it got particularly problematic. So why are these things important? Well, first of all, we've got to think about what it does to property prices, of course. So, for example, if we're thinking about developing sites, doing conversions, creating units that either we're going to sell or we're going to hold, the end value is going to be quite important. So would you want to start developing a site or taking on a big conversion when you're at or towards what you feel might be the end of an economic boom cycle? Well, no, because ultimately what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to get those end values and you're not going to be able to sell, get your money back out and make a profit, and potentially you're going to end up losing money on such a development. When's a good time to start developments? When you feel you're nearer the bottom of an economic cycle. So when things have been struggling, a little bit like they have in the 12 months in 2023, it might be a great time to consider whether you start a development project, because a typical development project from concept all the way through to execution can easily take you a couple of years, especially if there's significant planning involved. It's going to take you even longer than that. So you need to have your eyes on this sort of stuff, because no developer wants to be either selling or refinancing units in a recession. It's a guaranteed loser of a tactic, really. Why else is it important? Well, we have to consider rental income and affordability. So what we'd like is a healthy economy where, in the ideal world, wages were growing ahead of inflation, because apart from anything else, it means that our tenants have got some financial stability, they can afford to pay their rents, and they can afford to pay an increased rent every year, which is also going to go some way towards mitigating the rise in insurance costs every year, the rise in property maintenance costs every year, and the rise in some of the management costs every year as well. What's the real third thing we really need to consider economic cycles for? Well, that is investor sentiment. So how do investors feel? Seen lots of people saying this year, I'm fed up. People often find reasons when part of the economic cycle is tougher. So, there's effort involved in direct property investment. Of course there is. Can you be bothered to make that effort? The reality is, if you're getting a return for that effort you're putting in over and above the return you get for putting the money in the bank, for example, then that makes the effort worthwhile. If you're not getting a return on that effort and you want to then instead put the money in a 1-year government bond or a 5-year government bond, as my first video of the series is about, then you can't blame people for taking that money, especially when the returns have come from where they were at 0% up to more like 5 or even 6% earlier this year. So it's very important that we spend some time trying to understand where we are in the economic cycle. It's not something that changes every day. There's lots and lots of updating data, and luckily there's a lot of clues that are left normally when we're going into recession. And particularly recession we're interested in because it might also represent a fantastic buying opportunity as long as we're liquid and we can get hold of some credit. But the problem with recession is the mass media absolutely loves the word recession. And I often say people have predicted 0 of the last 8 recessions, or 8 of the last 0 recessions. They get it completely wrong either way. Unfortunately, recessions are a lot rarer than the word appears in Google Trends or in the mainstream media. So just remember that, and that's the point of why I spend my time writing the supplement for every Sunday morning, because I try and take the noise out and take a reasoned viewpoint about, apart from everything else, where we are in the economic cycle. So thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all again tomorrow.